Welcome back to House Education, Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. We today have the Secretary of Education with us, providing an opportunity for this committee with follow-up questions they may have based on the presentation we had the other day. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. If you have anything you want to open with, or do you want to just jump right into everybody's going through their notes, I think?
If it would be helpful, I thought I would open just with an overview that kind of addresses what many of the questions I've received.
Great. That'd be ready to start. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Hi, good morning. I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education. I'm also joined virtually by Emily Simmons. For the record.
Hi, Emily Simmons, General Counsel, Agency of Education.
Oh,
That was us. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Emily, would you do that again, please? Our volume wasn't turned up in here.
Sure. It's Emily Simmons. I'm the General Counsel at the Agency of Education. Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you. It was on our end. Yeah. Great.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to join you today to follow up on the presentation regarding governance. I understand there are a number of questions, so I thought I would start by just providing an overview of the proposal and then opening it up to questions so that we can help to provide further clarity. So as we provided in the brief, there's several recommendations regarding governance. So one is related to school district governance. This proposal recommends eliminating the supervisory union construct and moving from 119 school districts to 5 school districts. The intention of that is to really support equity in terms of funding and policy decisions and creating shared ownership around a larger group of communities that have diverse needs. We have within the proposal outlined the comparison with the proposed school districts and the existing structure. This also builds on a forum that already exists through the Regional Superintendents Association. They have been planning within this organization and is very inclusive of the existing school districts and their feeding patterns. We recognize that there's some conversation around how to maybe draw the lines differently. So that's something that we're open to having conversations around, but want to make sure that we're really thoughtful around the intention of the larger districts and the benefit that can bring in terms of equitable resources and providing more services to students and to teachers. Related to the regional structure, that also allows the district central offices to be more robust in providing additional specialized services that can be supportive of principals, teachers, and students across the broader region. We know that many of our districts have struggled because of budget constraints to bring on those specialized support services at the central office. And this is an opportunity to really think about how to pool resources in a way that can effectively and equitably serve our schools. Later this week, we will be providing some scenario planning around some of the options within the funding that allows for districts to customize their staffing and delivery in a way that's going to best meet the needs of schools across the district. The school advisory committees are designed to provide that local support at the school level, really focused on including inclusive participation of stakeholders within that community, and being able to provide input around the school improvement plan and equitable budgeting choices. This is really designed to connect community to the learning and teaching that's happening in school buildings to foster that type of local engagement. The education services agencies are a construct that we've talked about previously. They've been defined in the way of BOCES, Boards of Cooperative Education Services. We see that there's a value of having an education service agency available statewide to provide specialized services. And as we think about that, it's really being intentional around defining the role of the school, district, and state, and making sure that we have the right resources at every level of our system in the most efficient and effective way possible. So in our early contemplation, those would be focused on supporting CTE and also special education. The education ecosystem, I know there's been a lot of questions regarding the approach to creating a really intentional design to support our public education system. And so I'll spend a little bit of time and talking more about that. So there's clarity for what we're trying to achieve. So in this proposal, the 5 districts would all be operating districts. Currently in our system, we have a number of non-operating districts. And those non-operating districts will tuition. Sometimes they tuition out of state, sometimes they will tuition to another public school, sometimes they will tuition to an independent school. In this proposal, we would eliminate the tuitioning out of state to private schools. We would also eliminate the concept of a non-operating district. So every student in the state would be part of an operating district. And as such, as currently happens, there would be attendance zones where that student would be assigned to the school that is closest to them. And so that is part of the overall construct. The idea for coming forward with a very generous base is to make sure that we are adequately resourcing our public schools to provide a well-rounded and exceptional education. We know that within our current system, choice exists in a lot of different ways. So choice exists right now among public schools. So within districts, there's public school choice. That would largely be unchanged in this scenario, though I think there would be more thoughtful and intentional planning around where to locate that to make sure that we're creating really strong feeding patterns. And that would be part of the role of the school districts. At the high school level, we currently have school choice. And so that is something, a practice that has been longstanding. Part of the recommendations that we're putting forward is that there would be some additional consideration to school choice for high school to an independent school. And so we'll kind of walk through the planning there. So step 1 within this district would be to look at your overall school portfolio. In parallel, independent schools would go through a pre-eligibility approval and screening process through the State Board of Education. And then the districts would evaluate the ability for them to deliver public education to every student in their district. And then they would be able to come up with a plan that makes sense for their district. In many parts of our state, we know that districts have relied on independent schools in high school to provide education. And so there would be the option for the districts to choose for a school of choice to be an independent school, assuming they're pre-qualified through the criteria established at the state. And then they would go through an approval process to offer a certain number of spots for choice within the district. A district may also opt to provide choice within a public school. So right now, public school choice is already happening. The way we're really thinking about choice in this context is really more specialized programming. And so that would be up to the district to determine what's the right configuration for their school, for their school portfolio, and ensuring that every student in their district has the opportunity to have a great high quality education. Let me think of other questions that I've heard. So the other key piece of this work is shared accountability. So for any choice program right now, we have choice across the state. What we're proposing would be enhancing accountability standards so that there is parity in terms of evaluating school quality, whether you're a school of choice that's an independent school or a school of choice that is a public school. And so that would be part of this work. The other piece of this puzzle would be consistency in terms of funding. So in this scenario, there's not the process of setting tuition rates. There would be the ability to apply the weights and the weight amount to those schools should a district have an independent school that is a school district. Similar to how we've been talking about CTE and pre-K, there is an administrative fee to oversee the delivery of education to the district that does support that overall oversight and support for continuity of educational quality and operations for all schools within the district portfolio. I think that covers most of the governance piece, but I'm sure there's specific questions that we can answer.
Thank you very much. In sort of rereading the proposal, one of the things I appreciate about the school choice part is it says that special consideration should be given to ensure that all students can exercise the same choices regardless of their identified need for special education and other entitlement support such as 504, Kenny Bento. Would that be to say that if you are an independent school wanting to be recognized as a school of choice, that it's not a question of picking and choosing who comes to your school, but enrolling students as long as there are seats available?
That's correct. And that's part of the lottery process. So whether you're a choice school that's a public school or a choice school that's an independent school, there would be a lottery process to get entry into the school, and that could not have any practices that are discriminatory.
So it'd be an enrollment, it would not be an admittance, essentially.
Enrollment process. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then also within that area, once designated, a school choice school will be given additional flexibility from generally applicable state laws relative to school operations. Could you give me some kind of examples of that and why? And I assume that flexibility would be offered to a school choice school, whether it was public or private.
That's correct. So the concept here is that school choice schools are able to specialize. So they're able to specialize in a really specific area. So maybe it's an art school or an avionics school. And so there may be some operational considerations that when you look at the overview of the education quality standards, there may be certain parts of that they won't be required to implement, but they would still need to meet high quality standards in terms of outcomes of education quality and also financial solvency.
There was something else based on that as well. A district can also request specific flexibility from academic or operational requirements due to special circumstances by submitting a waiver. Is that kind of the same answer?
That's actually part, I think, of an existing process, so I can allow Emily Simmons to expand on that. We have many exceptions built into our system. So Emily, if you could elaborate on that.
So that speaks a little bit more to our thinking of the process that would govern these flexibilities. So one process that is not utilized very frequently but works well is that within the education quality standards, a district can seek a waiver. They have to accompany their waiver request with statements of their goals and how they're overall upholding education quality. So we see this, if you want to call it waiver process, working in much the same way, but covering more things than strictly EQS. So as an education lawyer, I look at it this way. Question one for me is going to be, is the flexibility they're asking for overlapping with something that federal law requires us to do? Right? Like, are our hands tied? And if not, then we would look at the district's plan in totality of, what they're trying to achieve and how their hands are tied by the state level requirement and grant the waiver on the basis of a well-rounded, well thought out, compelling plan.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the table, nominate, but I'll start with this side and we'll move around. My left side of the table, questions over here. Representative Long.
Sure. I'm curious about, I got a list of questions here, so let me just try to. In a district, you had mentioned there's a certain number of spots available, but how many schools in a district can be school choice schools? Is there a limit on how many schools, regardless of whether they're private or public?
Yeah, so what we're recommending, this needs to be intentional, planful, and practical. So the intention is that the school district is being thoughtful around where school choice is offered, and that there would be enough students within the district that would be interested in participating in that before they would continue to operate more and more choice schools. We have some kind of existing statute that kind of provides some parameters that I think would be useful as we think about that in terms of designing some guardrails and framework. So Emily Simmons, if you could expand on that, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So I think the very short answer to your question, Representative Long, is no, there's not an upward limit of the number of school choice schools that a district could approve in the proposal. the minimum is at least one. But what Secretary Saunders is speaking to is a mechanism that's similar to the current public high school choice outgoing students governor or cap. So that before we're talking about particular schools that serve as school choice schools or one school, we're looking at the portfolio of schools in the district and thinking about the total number of students grade 9 to 12 that could participate in one form or fashion in school choice. And if there's more interest, so I'm not even going to give you fake numbers. If there's more interest in outgoing and opting out of the default high school that the student is assigned to, then that number, that allowable outgoing number, then you would have a lottery to even get into the school choice program, so to speak, before you then looked at which school you would enroll in, which is what we do now. And I know you're familiar with the public high school choice program. There are two numbers, an outgoing and an incoming.
So just quick follow-up. I got other questions, but I'll end it with this one and let somebody else talk. Recognizing there's a lottery proposed and there's 5 districts, can a student apply for a school that's outside of their district, ask for a voucher to send to a neighboring district, state?
Not in our proposal, no. This is inside the geographic boundaries of the district.
And we often get the question of, a lot of the proposal makes sense if you're building it from the ground up, right? All of these considerations are based on the fact that we have a lot of choice within our system. And what this proposal is aiming to do is ensuring that we are strategic, intentional, and thoughtful about where we have choice in our system, that we have shared accountability, and that we're able to ensure high quality public schools close to students where they live.
Anyone else this side?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Rep. Long, when you say a voucher, typically in other states, what we describe as a voucher is basically through it. Parents get the money and they take that money and they go wherever they want. So we just want to be really clear that that's not the system that we're describing. So just as when we say choice in Vermont, that means something quite specific. When we're using the term voucher, I think we need to be more specific about what we mean.
So tell me the difference between parent choosing to where to send their child. I mean, obviously a child is going to say, I either want to go to the school that I am closest to, which there's named, or choose to go somewhere else, and money will follow.
It's funding school options. And the parts of our system that are designed to be vouchers have been eliminated in this plan. So within Vermont has had a very long-standing tradition of using vouchers. And that's happening in non-operating districts where it really is the parent chooses the school, that can be within the district, that can be outside of the state, and the money follows the student. This proposal is being intentional around identifying schools of choice that are designed to support the overall ecosystem within the district and funding those schools meeting those criteria with accountability. Vouchers typically go to, they might have one child within a school that might receive that voucher in another state. That's very hard to have accountability. So you're not able to kind of have the volume in terms of number of students to evaluate the overall performance. So those tend to be, I think the philosophical construct is that your accountability is based on parents' choice. What we're constructing is a shared accountability system that's based on outcomes for students.
Representative McCann?
Do we have interstate districts now? And
Yeah.
what happens with the kids who live on the border who might be going to a different state?
Yeah, so we did flag that within our report. We have 2 interstate districts that does require some additional planning and actually some decision-making at the level of Congress to change that configuration. It's a small number of students that are being served there, but that is something that we would be contemplating of ensuring that those dollars are within the Vermont system, especially given that we are really one of the top spenders in education and would be really funding at a very high level. It's important that we're mindful around how we're investing those dollars and strengthening Vermont public education system.
As we follow on Representative McCann's question a little bit, this would still allow for places like where we grew up, it's not an interstate district, really students relied on the public high school that was across the board.
Yeah, so in this plan, we did not design the plan around the exceptions. We really designed the plan around building a state system that would serve over 80,000 students. This plan has to be practical. And so as we talk about some of those kind of one-offs, those are conversations that we need to have to make sure we're giving kids a high quality education. But the principles and the framework that we're designing are intended to build a strong Vermont public education system.
Around to you, Representative. Oh, I'm sorry.
I guess that's a question, and maybe you don't have an answer, but eliminating tuition out of state. Because that I know is a concern. Far reaches of the Northeast Kingdom where the New Hampshire school's closer. In our non-operating district up there. So this would eliminate out-of-state tuition, but we've also talked, there may be some exceptions to this as needed based on geography and size.
Needs to be practical.
Okay.
Most, I think some states make a hard policy decision where they don't allow dollars to go out of state. That's a policy choice. And be thoughtful around what exception that too.
Representative Brady.
What are the shared accountability mechanisms? How do those function? What are they? And how are they different for a public school versus a private school or a school choice school?
So right now, our accountability system, I think, is as confusing as our funding system. And so the intent as we're building out that framework is to make sure that it's more transparent, that we're able to measure student outcomes, both in terms of proficiency and growth, and ensuring that that is done in a way that is consistent across all settings.
I don't understand what that actually means and what would happen in the field. So if a school doesn't have certain test scores, are they closed? Are they measured against?
So we need to develop processes around measuring performance. And if schools aren't meeting those performance objectives, that we have a very robust process in place to support that school in helping their students achieve at high level. And then if they're not achieving, we do need to have different conversations as a state around how best to support those schools and those students.
But I think maybe, could you, I do think what you're expressing is some concern and understandably in maybe some parts of our state where maybe they have a high needs population that, you know, the performance scores are not the same as in a more affluent community and there's a real fear. I don't think that's what Secretary Saunders is articulating. In fact, we're really looking at growth as a really critical way to measure student performance in a way that we don't actually do as effectively as we'd like to today. So those systems that maybe are on average might look like they're underperforming, but actually are showing real growth for their students. Those are systems that are operating well, right? And we want to sort of celebrate those. So I think what I'm hearing is that sort of underlying concern that I've heard from folks as well. So just being clear about.
And so I've worked in a number of states, and I would say other states prioritize growth as a performance metric more than Vermont. And so as we're having those conversations, it's really important that our framework is focused on growth and giving credit to the fact that many students may be coming in below grade level, and we want to make sure that they are achieving that level of growth. They may not make proficiency within that year, but we want to make sure that they are on the right path to getting there. And so as we talk more specifically around metrics for quality, growth is going to be playing a much more central focus than I think we have in the past.
And that's markedly different than what exists in EQS in terms of the ability now to offer accountability and support to the system.
Within we can have, I think, a deeper dive of accountability, which could be helpful in just understanding our state plan and how we measure performance. We have some schools in our system that are too small to be part of our accountability framework. And because of that, there's not a great measure of school quality. And there's also puts them at a disadvantage of applying for funding to provide additional resources. We have been working with USAID actually to amend our plan to ensure that those smaller schools can be part of that in a different way, so that as they're part of a larger district, they could take advantage of that. But overall, there is an importance as we think about scale in terms of measuring quality and supporting and resourcing our schools.
So I just wanted to ask one final on the shared academy mechanism. Are those intended when those are processes are developed, they will be exactly the same for a public school and a non-public school?
Yes.
Representative Hunter.
Yeah, one word I've seen here a lot is equity, and that's great. And if I look into this side of my crystal ball and I look to the future, and I can see in the district perhaps an art school that's cropped up, a STEM school that's cropped up, and they're doing really well. So what happens when they reach their capacity limit and kids get in this lottery because they really, really want to go there? They don't get in. What happens then?
So that could happen now in our system, the way that choice is structured. And part of the intent here is to move us to a place where we're more intentional and planful about where choice is provided, and that's done in a way that is equitable. So in your example, if there is an arts program in one part of the district that might be too far away for someone in the other part of the district to participate in, that would be something where the district should reflect on that and say, there's a high demand for this type of specialized program. Can we build that into our programming within an existing public high school? Is that something we want to consider of being able to replicate in another part of the district?
And I think also just as a sort of key and fundamental principle of this proposal is that every student will have access to a high quality K through 12 public school. So that is a really critical piece of a choice system, is that if you have a lottery and a student is not able to attend a school of choice, it doesn't mean that their education, the quality of their education should suffer. It may mean that they might not have access at that time to the arts program that they really wanted to get into. And as Zoe said, that there's considerations that they should make there. But it does mean that they should have access to a high quality high school, a public high school that they are assigned to. And that's a fundamental principle here. It's not a sort of a zero-sum game. And that is how you achieve that critical component of that, right, which we don't currently have.
The proposal is recognizing that we have dependence on choice programs in our system currently. And the proposal is designed to be strategic in managing choice in a way that provides opportunity while also strengthening our public schools.
Does the district have the power in your vision to say, we've got enough school choice schools, we're not approving anymore?
Yes, that's part of the proposal, that they need to be looking at their overall portfolio and identifying where there may be a need to have a choice school, be that through a partnership with an independent school or an existing public school.
But an independent school doesn't have a right to become a school choice school if the district says we've got too many school choice schools and we're not approving.
Yeah, in this plan, the independent school would need to be basically pre-qualified to meet the criteria that the state established through the state board. If the district opens up choice programs, they could apply to be selected as a school of choice within that district.
But if they meet all the criteria, they still could be told, no, we're not going to increase the size of our portfolio.
The district may opt not to invite applications for an independent school to be a school choice school.
We're down here before we go ahead. Just want to give everybody the first round, other than me, of course, because I just jumped in with it.
One of them is just a really quick clarifying question. It's not my real question. So the clarifying question is, you talked about enrollment, not admittance a little while ago, that kids don't need to apply, they're just enrolled. So if they are enrolled into this independent school and then they don't work out, they don't meet the standards of behavior, does the independent school get to let them go and say you're going back to your public school? And if so, does the money stay at the independent school or does the money follow the student back to the public school? That's my first question. Do you want me to stop there?
Yeah, let,
Okay.
That was on
let me
my
make sure we're clarifying, because I think we might be having different definitions as we're thinking about enrollment and the overall application process. You think about the experience from a high school student. So it's a high school student perspective. They are assigned to a high quality public high school in their attendance zone. They also have the choice to attend a career and technical education center, as they do now. And they would have the option of applying at a school choice school that would be approved through criteria that's established at the state by the State Board of Education and approved by the district. If they decide that they want to exercise that choice, they would apply to that school choice school. If there are spots available, they would enroll. If there are no spots available, they still have access to a high quality public education school and a career and technical education program as well, if they are interested. With anything in terms of the overall support structure, we've talked about, I know there's a lot of conversation around the funding, similar to what we're proposing with CTE and with pre-K, there's an administrative fee and responsibility of overseeing non-public schools. And so that's part of the contemplation as we think about the robust central office and being able to have that type of coordination and support to oversee and ensure support around things like special education and other areas of compliance.
I don't necessarily feel like that addressed my question.
Right.
My question, so, and also you used the word apply this time, when before we were talking about enrolling. So
every student is automatically enrolled to the public school that they're zoned to. If they choose to apply to a choice program or choose to take advantage of the CTE, that would go through an application process because it'd be aligned to their interest.
Through
Okay.
a lottery. Through a
So
lottery.
I feel like that
So it's
changed.
not application to the independent school, it's application.
Oh,
to
I'm
the
sorry.
lottery.
So most states just use that as an application. So however we define that, if that's a form, it's a form of interest in attending a school choice school. That would be a lottery to get in. There are processes and procedures to make sure that that is an inclusive process. And if there are spots available, they would be able to attend.
I think what may clarify better for Representative Harper is if we were to say a school choice school has plenty of capacity and there's no need for a lottery, students enroll in that school.
They would still have to go through the practice of expressing interest in attending that school.
But the school itself would enroll them and wouldn't figure out if they were a good fit.
No.
And then if they kick them out, does the money follow them back to their school?
That's the,
So I think we see, so I think there's scenarios within our system right now. If a student is not thriving in a public school, they may go to another public school. So that would be the same parameter here as we look at movement of students and ensuring that they have the right support and fit within their academic environment.
Right, but now we're talking about a private. So this money that would have gone to a public school is now going to a private school and then getting stuck there.
No,
instead
it's
of
going to a school choice school.
It's going to a school choice
That
school
might be like a magnet.
that may not be an independent school. So this is, it's, this whole proposal is built on the fact that in the state of Vermont, for hundreds of years, there's been a reliance on school choice of our state. And this is a way to do that in a strategic way that's resourcing schools and school choice school could be an independent school. It could be a public school. And it would have to meet criteria and be approved through the school district process.
Representative Browns.
Yeah, this, I think this goes back to something we were talking about earlier. So, my question was around shared accountability. So in this potentially transformed ecosystem, when we say we're going to apply the same quality standards and outcome measurements, and transparency standards to all the schools in that ecosystem, whether they're school choice school, public school, an approved independent school, I just want to be really clear. Are there exceptions in there that we should think about, or are we really contemplating same means same?
So we're contemplating same means same as we're talking about measuring quality outcomes. How you get to those quality outcomes may differ, right? So we're not a state right now that has a state approved curriculum. What we are proposing is that the Agency of Education has a more robust process to have an evidence-based review and recommending curriculum, right? And making that available. But there's different pathways currently that our schools are taking to get to the same outcomes. When we look at academic performance, we have a lot of variability across. And so as we think about ensuring every child has access to the right high quality instructional materials, that's what we're talking about within this plan. There's flexibility, assuming you're achieving the outcomes. If you're not able to achieve the outcomes, then there's different support and different recommendations that would come out of a thoughtful and intentional planning process to make sure that students have access to a high quality education.
And can we offer a moment of clarification there? Because, and Simmons, I'm going to call on you on this one. So we're also simplifying the universe of schools here in a lot of ways. So Simmons, we talk about, because I'm going to use the wrong terms, but we're no longer contemplating a universe of approved independent schools, right? There's just two categories of independent school now, moving forward.
There's just two categories.
Yeah, and if you want to articulate what those are, because you're going to name them.
So in my very strict terminology world, I would call those school choice schools and independent schools, which the agency would continue to recognize. We call our recognized schools now. And the function of that recognition is to establish that a student attending that school is not truant, right? They're meeting mandatory attendance, and that's all. So school choice schools, public money, shared accountability, the rest of the universe, recognition for truancy purposes.
Which is a recognized school heading as well, right? That fits the definition of.
That's correct.
So just, can I quickly follow up on that? So that sort of broad umbrella of shared accountability doesn't necessarily go to other areas beyond outcomes like teacher licensure or transparent budgeting processes. So we're not contemplating that in the universe of sameness.
So I think it's a difference between inputs and outputs, right? We want to make sure that we're achieving at high level across the state. And if you're a school choice school, for example, and you have a specialization in the arts, you might have a master artist who's a famous artist coming and teaching it, right? And you probably want that exception to be able to support and furthering the advancement of that program. So they're just, again, it's looking at practical ways to allow for specialization within school choice schools that are going to be a small portion of your portfolio.
And we also articulated in the policy brief, and I think what you're asking for is what exactly are those standards? And we're saying we have not fully identified that. What we do have is these are what we're contemplating as some of those standards, which do include a measure of fiscal sustainability or viability. And we did call that out in the brief. So I think that's what you're asking. The answer is yes.
Well, I know this is my last thing. So I understand where you're going at a high level. I guess where my brain is getting a little bit stuck when we talk about shared accountability broadly, it sort of depends on how we're defining sameness. And so are we setting ourselves up for an ecosystem where the flip side of shared accountability is actually competition because the rules aren't the same for everybody?
The way that this is designed is to create an intentional ecosystem, being mindful of the district's demographics and student enrollment, and being thoughtful around and intentional where you would place school choice options.
Round two.
If every student in the state under this plan is assigned to a high quality public school, does every student in the state have transportation to a high quality public school? Is that part of the assumption?
Currently, we don't require transportation for every school. We, and within our funding proposal, have built in additional cost for transportation, assuming that that is part of.
So there are places that currently do not have a public school within 20, 30, whatever miles we want to call it. Is that student assigned to a school that may be an hour or more, that realistically they're never going to go to, but it's sort of on paper to say that they've been assigned to a high quality public school?
So I would say this proposal is not just about checking the box. It's about making sure that we're providing a high quality public education. I think what you're asking for is to do some of the mapping to identify where there may be long commutes. And that might also be a reason that a district chooses to think about choice for that particular circumstance. So again, this is about being practical. And there may be certain parts of our state that geographically it would make sense to identify a choice school, be that an independent school, as opposed to building a new public school building, right? These are just practical conversations.
But then not every student is being assigned to high quality.
When you look at we can bring the map to you so that you can have a better sense of that. It goes into our conversation around what schools are small by necessity, which is versus what schools are small by choice. We understand that we don't want students on a bus for over an hour, right? We want to make sure that we're being thoughtful and intentional and that there's close proximity. Again, where there are outliers, that's why there's the opportunity for choice, because that gives some flexibility within those districts to achieve that.
Representative Long.
And
Representative
the other piece I would add to that, as you think about the assignment, is also around creating an envelope of support for that school as well. And that's part of the intent of the larger region, so that there is the opportunity for sharing resources and things like that with those schools that are in close proximity.
So my question continues the conversation around equitable access. So in that scenario, some children it's possible for some children to have access to a school choice school when others can't, based just on whether transportation is provided or not, because some families might have more resources to transport their own kid. So that I just put that out there. It's not.
To clarify, right now, Vermont does not require transportation for public schools.
That's
So-
absolutely correct. So that
This
kind
is
of,
a current equity issue that you're addressing, not a new equity issue that's being presented.
that's absolutely correct.
And those are
it's not
policy-
being,
and those
it's not
are
being addressed in the new
policy
plans. Right.
what we've built in is kind of a blunt estimation around what the increased cost of transportation would be. So right
Okay.
now, we reimburse at 50%. Within the funding model, we're assuming 100% reimbursement. But we're also assuming that there would be some efficiencies built in kind of organizing and doing shared contracts with transportation. We have talked with Health Ways and Means, but that's a very blunt estimate. So further modeling will need to be done to be precise if it is a requirement, what that actual true cost will be. That will need to be determined as you actually think about the overall portfolio and where you would identify school choice schools. I would say on the same vein, there are going to be parts of our system where you have a small public school that wouldn't be small in another place of our state just because of necessity, right? And that gets back to this plan is designed to be practical to meet the needs of students while also ensuring a consistent quality.
So transportation wasn't going to be my question. It just
Okay.
was prompted by that. But so I'm trying to understand how private schools and public schools both become school choice schools and equity can be achieved. And so it is my understanding we operate under a system currently where some schools operate, independent schools operate essentially with open enrollment, but others don't operate with open enrollment, independent schools, current system. But there is no requirement for any independent school today to keep a child in their school if it doesn't necessarily, and I think I'm getting to your question, if the mission isn't met or whatever reason that it's not fitting. So what I guess I'm trying to understand is, will the requirement be there down the road for, will a independent school choice school, if they're an independent school, private school, be required to operate like a public school and provide special education services and be required, as public schools are today, to keep every child if they choose to stay?
think that Simmons can speak to I'll let her speak to that, but I would also say that in our public schools, sometimes they will assign a student to actually attend a separate school, which is called therapeutic school.
Sure,
So,
that's,
but I'm just saying it's not actually a unique factor to independent versus a public school of choice. Those would be options around where's the best placement for a student, and there's opportunities in our system for those choices to be.
are there other, since you described it, are there other ways that public schools besides not able to meet their needs and a child needing to be assigned to a therapeutic school? Are there other ways that public schools
I can let,
move their
yeah, let
students?
Simmons navigate that and listen.
So I think the way I would approach the answer to both of these questions is to say that in current law, public schools have very clear due process obligations to students in discipline matters, right? You have to provide certain opportunities for hearing and appeal before you can suspend or expel a student from a public school. And our proposal would place the same due process protections on school choice schools, whether they are public or independent. So we're talking about the process that a student is entitled to before a discipline is imposed that would suspend or expel them.
In the limited time we have left, I just have some practical questions. They're a little less out there, but at the high level. That is, okay, let's say we move to 5 districts. How do we bring all the public school employees under a same salary schedule contract? And who does that?
Yeah, so there's certainly complexity to that work, and we've started exploring that with the policy sprint teams. We do have some point of reference because as a state, we have done mergers of school boards. So there is some examples or lessons learned for how to approach that work. The principles around this proposal are ensuring teacher pay equity, and there's different pathways to getting there, but that's what we're trying to achieve.
Also on kind of a practical level, the new envisioned school boards would have enormous responsibilities. And I guess in legislative terms, we call them powers. But we don't have sort of an enumerated list of what those powers should be. And how, so I guess to do our work,
Yeah.
I would say, in order for us to put a bill on the floor, that bill would have to say, these are the powers and duties of this school board.
Yes, we
And we don't have that.
We have outlined the powers and duties of a school board, and I'll allow Emily to expand on that. I think the additional piece of this is that there would be more rigorous requirements. Do you think about training of those school boards? So,
And leveraging the district quality governance
That's right.
standards, which already exist.
Right.
But
So-
I'm coming right down
So,
to,
hiring, firing the superintendent, and
well,
right.
about assigning every child to a high quality public school. That would be one of the jobs of the school board.
So my very short answer is 16 VSA section 563 would
Yeah.
stay in place. That's powers of school boards now. Needs a couple of amendments. What comes to mind is the duty to warn the budget to the electorate as a result of the foundation formula, but that's still the starting place. And just as in law now, not every single task that might fall to a school board is listed in 563. We're also, I acknowledge Representative Conlon, we're picking up a couple along the way that we need to make sure are clear in our guidance, but they might not be enumerated in that one specific page in the green book, just like they are now.
And I guess just also practically speaking, I would like to see a more specific proposal as to what that school board is. We talk about semi-professional. What does that really mean? Frankly, as a former school board member, I look at the job that this school board would have, and I'd be like, well, so I wonder how we move forward with that. But we will await further detail. Go ahead.
Are you done with that? Tom? All right. I want to go back to something that Representative Long kind of brought up. She started with transportation, but I think it's bigger than that, and it does end in a question. But when I think about things like transportation and other factors, it seems like this school choice school plan really exists on the premise that every single student in Vermont has someone at home that's invested in their education and knows how to shop for schools, or that they already have had a talent or a skill or an interest cultivated, and that some other school choice school might be able to really speak to that. So I'm wondering what is going to be sort of the safety net in place to keep it so that the schools that are not having a specific interest are not just drained of all of the students whose parents know how to shop for schools, who have transportation, who are college bound, or have some kind of skill that they've been working on, and that what we're left with are kids who don't really know where they want to go or what they want to do or necessarily want to be there. Even though we've created a high quality school, it seems like we're actually have the potential to create a school that's discriminating now between socioeconomic status, and what's going to keep that from happening.
So I would say that this proposal is built on an assumption that Vermont has depended on school choice for hundreds of years. So I just want to put that out there. And I think what you're asking is, how do we make sure that parents are aware of different opportunities and that there's a clear, transparent, and easy process to apply for a school choice school? So those are kind of work at the district level of making sure that that is a very easy and fair process. I think we can look at research across the country. A lot of students in poverty exercise school choice and are looking for different options. So I actually think that's kind of a different assumption than what's happening in practice research.
And I think also there are standards and practices that are meant to support in middle school the sort of development of understanding a student's sort of profile and interests and how the school can best support it. And part of our proposal is also having a system that fully supports districts and schools in the implementation of those best practices. And our funding proposal is also building in at the middle school level opportunities to explore things like PE and other kind of pathways early, so that they could identify by the time of ninth grade what their interests are. But I do think we actually have a system that values those kinds of explorations and opportunities, but what we have not yet done is fully in an equitable way.
Yeah,
I think
I would say there's been a lot of thought in focusing on equity, helping students to explore their interests, but there has not been fidelity of implementation or oversight. And a key example is personalized learning plans are implemented in very different ways across the state, and some don't have personalized learning. So listen, in this is really looking at what are the key levers that are going to be important that we've already put in law that we know are valuable to ensure that students get those opportunities. So that means that there would be more oversight, right, of personalized learning plans and support. And every seventh grader has that opportunity to sit down with a counselor. They're reviewing their interests, they're exploring that. They know what's available at their assigned public high school. They now know what the programs are available at the tech center. They know what programs are available at the school choice school. And so the middle school and the structures that we've already built have the way to help students explore that and connect them. So it isn't dependent only on a parent being knowledgeable around those choices. We need to build a system that exposes students to these opportunities. We've done a lot of that in law, but it hasn't been implemented with fidelity in practice, and there's been very limited oversight. So as we look at this work, it's what are we going to be tight on and what are we going to be loose on? The things that we're tight on are the things that are most important and impactful for students to achieve at high levels and to be able to explore their interests and pursue these pathways. And so that's probably an area we're going to need to strengthen how we support that, but do it in a way that's not additional paperwork, that's not bureaucratic and just a lot of documentation, but it's in a way that's meaningful to the intent of that design. And so that's when I think we come back and talk about accountability. We'll look at that. We have a lot of the pieces in place. I think where we see in our system, there's a big disconnect between theory and action, and a lot of key areas that are critical to addressing the issues of equity that we're all committed to do.
Representative Brady.
I'm struggling with I feel like a different message today, and that as this has been rolled out over the since the beginning of the session and from the governor, it, you know, sounded much like a plan to really invest in and shore up public education, that the vast majority of our students in Vermont currently attend public schools. It's a small number in choice. It has been leveled many times. Why are people worried so much about that small number? And I'm hearing an articulation of a system now being created because of hundreds of years of choice. And so now for that small amount, and now it's that driving force that is dictating the sort of version of the entire system that we're driving to. And I'll never apologize for bristling at choice, because in an ideal world, every kid would have choice, but we live in the real world. And Leanne and I teach high school in the real world with a lot of students who do not have a lot of choices, and it is no fault of their own. And there is no amount of parent education. It is societal factors. It is the things that make our community schools so strong. It is the reason that we have universal school meals. Do I wish it was a different reality? Absolutely. But I am terrified for the future of our kids, that my kids are fine. I'm not worried about my two sons, but there are a lot of kids that I teach every year that this system is not designed to serve, that from what I have heard so far.
So this system limits choice in very clear ways. Our current system does not have accountability around choice. And it's built on a premise of we are going to fund at high levels our schools so that our public schools are offering really great resources. Across the state, that's not happening. We have a lot of variability with how our schools are funded. So this plan is saying we are investing in building strong schools, and we're going to invest at high levels for that. We're still going to be one of the top spenders on education. And then we're going to manage choice in a way that's going to be practical within the system, and also allow for innovation and being able to offer specialized programs.
I think also, if I can clarify again, because this is one of those places where the word choice means different things to different people. So when Zoe was saying today, when we're talking about choice, we're talking about hundreds of years. We're also talking about the choice that exists between public schools in our system, which last week when we were here, there was a conversation about what does choice mean in a non-operating district. You don't want to take that away. And I said, okay, this is really interesting. In other states, choice means something quite specific. It tends to mean the choice to attend a non-public school, a charter school, or a magnet school. In Vermont, depending on who you talk to, and even in this room, I think people are using choice in fundamentally different ways. So what you just described, I think, is not at all what we were saying today. So I think it's really important that we get really concrete on that. What we're actually talking about is, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but please validate. I think what you were describing is that we were proposing a system that was built for the 4,000 some odd kids in independent schools. And that's not what we just described. So what we're sort of referencing here is a system that actually strengthens public schools, allows public schools to do what some districts currently do, which is create magnet schools, right? And actually allow for that kind of innovation and flexibility in across kind of 5-district model, and would actually allow the districts to have a larger degree of control over ensuring the health of their public school ecosystem, while also offering the opportunity for students to be able to attend schools that offer specific kind of programming. So I do think it's really important. Choice is a really fraught word in Vermont, but I think it just means different things to different people. And so we are not using choice as a capital C to talk about choice to non-public independent schools. That's not how we're describing choice today. So I think it is really important that we talk about that, because last week the same conversation happened And there was a really clear message from other folks at this table that choice has to include the conversation around our non-operating districts and public to public. And so we're sort of coming back in, trying to reframe, saying this is what choice means. And I don't know what other word we could possibly use to describe this, but I do think it's really important that we get very clear about that we are actually not talking about a system that would really expand a great number of students in non-public schools. We're talking about a system that manages choice with shared accountability for both non-public schools and for public magnet schools.
I guess I would agree. Choice is a really fraught word because choice is a really fraught concept. It is more of a choice for some than others, even if we're talking within a public realm and sort of magnets. That is quite different than how our system operates today, and than how I would envision a system that truly serves all kids, particularly our most disadvantaged. I just want to apologize earlier because I didn't mention 3 of us who teach kids in the real world. So I missed it. But
So-
Those kids out in Worcester appreciate
We're a little over time,
Yeah.
but I
think it's important that we respond.
I think there's a
That,
lot of
that- yeah.
misperceptions around
Misperceptions,
what
yeah.
this proposal is intended to do. This proposal is intended to strengthen our public schools and to be more strategic about if and when we use choice to meet needs of students. I think it's important to acknowledge that not every school can fully meet the needs of every student, right? There's going to need to be, in a great ecosystem, other options for students. That's why we have CTE programs. That's why we have laws about flexible pathways. This is really thinking about how do we nurture those interests for students, do it in a way that's really building a strong ecosystem and funding it so that it can be sustainable.
just a few minutes left. I'm gonna take time for myself. First of all, just on the whole choice and tradition and all that, really what we've had is a couple hundred years of relying on historic academies to provide high school for students where there wasn't a public high school. And we've seen that has actually evolved over time, where some of those historic academies had themselves into public high schools, in case St. Albans. And that sort of choice as we see it today, or tuitioning as we see it today, has really evolved over the past 40 years, where we've seen growth in the number of independent schools that are approved and eligible for public tuition. And that the public high school choice that exists is really a rather modern system that exists out there, and does provide some great opportunities and perhaps some model stuff there. So I just wanted to say that. I do have one final question. This will be probably for you, Emily, but in the last hour, we just heard a bit about AOE capacity to look over articles of agreement and sort of deal with BOCES if it were to be a growing thing. This proposal to me seems like it's going to require a lot of rulemaking, a lot of rules to be written, which is usually the AOE's job. Does it have the capacity to take, if we were to say tomorrow, this is what we're doing? Does the AOE have the capacity to deal with that from a rulemaking point of view?
Let Emily kind of bring the rationale to that.
I would say usually it's a job that would go to the state board, right? You have given rulemaking to the state board, but the AOE has the capacity within existing resources to undertake this rulemaking that the state board is currently responsible for, and new rulemaking that will be necessary because of our governance and funding proposals. Yeah, totally.
Thank you for staying over. Thank you for coming in again so soon after the initial presentation. I'm sure.
I was late. I got a call from the school nurse and we didn't.